Welcome to Mission Majjhima. Ajahn?
Ajahn.
Ajahn, so tell us about Majjhima Nikaya 99, the Subha Sutta.
So in this sutta, we meet Subha, who's a young Brahmin student who comes to meet the Buddha and has questions about the value of a holy life versus the value of a household life. So he comes and says that he's heard that a householder is practicing the true way and that a renunciant is not practicing the true way. What do you think about this? Asking the Buddha. And the Buddha says that he is a vibhajavada, one who speaks or who has a doctrine of distinction, one who speaks after making an analysis. Vibhajja literally means analysis. Bhaj is the root which means to disambiguate or to separate apart. So rather than having a categorical answer, he actually looks a bit more closely and he says, the Buddha says that he does not praise wrong practice, whether it's a householder or one gone forth, a pabhajita. He doesn't praise wrong practice, but he does praise right practice, whether it's a householder or a renunciant. So it's not about the specific outer form that someone has, but about what they're doing internally. Subha then follows up and says, actually, I've heard that a household life is of great fruit and great benefit, whereas a renunciant life is of little fruit and little benefit. And here the Buddha responds and says, again, I'm a speaker who makes distinctions. He says, there are certain occupations which require little activity, but which when they fail are of little fruit, and when they succeed are of great fruit. And there are other professions which require great activity, and when they fail, they're of little fruit, and when they succeed, they're of great fruit. So the commonality between those is when a occupation, when it fails, it's of little fruit, and when it succeeds, it's of great fruit. But here, the distinction is between farming, which is said to be a occupation which requires a lot of activity, versus trade, which is a livelihood that requires fewer things than does agriculture. So too, a household life has a lot of duties, a lot of things to do. And when it fails, it's of little fruit. When it succeeds, it's of great fruit. And then a monastic life, it has fewer things. There's less that we have to do. We don't use money. So therefore we're not beholden in the same way that householders are. But when a renunciant life fails, i.e. if someone lives a lazy, holy life, then it's of little fruit. Whereas if it succeeds, our whole life is so concentrated, has such a clear goal of enlightenment. That's huge fruit. That's the highest fruit. Subha says that in the Brahmins, they've got what are called the punya kiryavatu, or bases of merit. So 5 things. That is truth, austerity, or tapa, celibacy, learning, and charity, or chaga, or generosity. So these, according to Subha's framing, are punya kiryavatu, bases of merit. What do you think about this, Buddha? And then the Buddha says, what is your source of this? Do they really know and see? And Subha admits that the source of that is not actually very clear, even though the Buddha doesn't say those are wrong things, and he'll come back around to how he frames these 5 qualities. Subha attributes it eventually to, refers back to Pokarasati, and the Buddha points out that Pokarasati, this older Brahmin, has certain views about omniscience, but doesn't actually know and see himself. And the Buddha then therefore says Pokarasati in this whole lineage of Brahmins, if it isn't based on actual clear knowing, is like the blind leading the blind. The Buddha then suggests through reasoning that compassion be added to this list of 5. So there's truth, austerity, or tapa, and celibacy, and learning, and chaga, or generosity, and then add compassion, which is fascinating. But then the Buddha reframes the whole list, saying that he doesn't call them bases of merit, he calls them requisites of the mind for developing heart, which is free from ill will and hostility, which is great. And he says that one can actually think, and this is my favorite part of the sutta, is that the Buddha actually frames it as healthy ego development in the first person, saying, one thinks, I am one who tells the truth. I'm Satyavado Homi. I'm one who speaks the truth. Based on that, one gains inspiration in the meaning, inspiration in the Dhamma, and based on that inspiration in the Dhamma, one develops pamoja, or this well-being, which then in other suttas leads to joy and tranquility and sukha, and then eventually to samadhi. So this wholesome sense of self, this wholesome ego function leading to samadhi, eventually framed in the first person. I am one who is celibate. I'm one who not just speaks the truth, I'm one who's generous. I'm one who has learning. So yeah, these are benefits of actually having cultivated these, because it gives you strength to ward off ill will and hate. The Buddha then teaches Subha about the 4 Brahmaviharas of loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity, saying that when you develop them, they can diminish the potency of bad deeds because of the vastness of the mind that has developed them. And in another sutta, and in this one, he gives a simile of a conch blower. Just as a conch blower would blow and the sound would go in every direction, so too one practices these 4 Brahmaviharas, and the effects of that go in every direction. It's abundant, exalted, immeasurable. And in another sutta, this simile of salt is given. Just as if you put a little bit of salt in a glass of water, it's going to make the whole glass of water salty. So too, if you do bad deeds but have a limited, constricted mind, you'll feel the results of that. Things feel cramped. Whereas if you put a little bit of salt in a huge freshwater lake, you won't taste the difference at all. So too, if you have a vast mind based on these 4 Brahmaviharas, then that little piece of wrongdoing, you won't taste the effects. Subha gains faith and then leaves. He takes refuge and then leaves and meets Janusoni, tells about how inspired he was. And Janusoni says that it's wonderful that King Pasenadi has the Buddha in his realm. Ajahn, what would you like to draw out of this sutta?
This sutta I really appreciate. First, it's just a perennial debate. Subha's coming saying, aren't you recluses by pulling in, by not doing as much in the world, neglecting your duty? Isn't your life of small merit? And he references householders and recluses, but there's this overlay there of Brahmins versus the Buddhist and the monastics as well. And the Buddha's response, as you noted, in the Panha Sutta and Anguttara Nikaya 4.42, the Buddha says he has 4 different ways of answering questions. He'll give a categorical answer, so yes or no, something like that, a clear answer, an analytical answer, which is what he does here, making distinctions and kind of analyzing before giving a single response. He'll give a counter question, or he'll put the question aside. And that clear understanding, that nuance of how we respond to inquiries is so well articulated there. And you just see the Buddha using it beautifully in situations like this, where he really navigates a very nuanced and perennial question about how do we live a wholesome life with a lot of care and grace. So then the Buddha is saying that he doesn't give a categorical answer, but rather, if one engages in either of these ways of life, of great activity or a small activity, it's how one engages that makes it of great fruit or little, if one succeeds or not. Which reminds me of Mother Teresa's, there are no great acts, just small acts done with great love. And there's some deep truth there where the Buddhist kind of clarity on the importance of intention and how we hold these things is paramount. You can see his skill because he doesn't really initially counteract Subha's assertion about the householder having more. He says both can be good or bad, but then he references, when Subha references his teacher, Pokarasati, the Buddha interestingly says, look, this person, this teacher doesn't have direct experience, and it's like a blind person saying that the moon doesn't exist because they don't see it, which is a distressingly relevant narrative in today's age of secular materialism as well, where there's a conceit about Occam's razor. I don't see it, so it doesn't. What I see exists, and nothing else exists. And that "and" is an unnecessary addition, and it's a huge one. Occam's razor at its most clear is what I see is, visible and exists in one sense. But as to what we don't have access to, perhaps we don't have the right technology of the mind to see it. So just that humility kind of motion to there. And then the Buddha does something very interesting where he's not just debating Subha, he's drawing him along into the spiritual path. He talks about how the 5 hindrances need to be in abeyance before one can encounter these jhanic states of concentration, which he compares to fire burning on nothing, a clean flame. And you can see in this, he's kind of drawing Subha along towards a path of practice, actually, and inspiring him towards actually, practicing well. And then he makes this very interesting motion, which you mentioned, which is that these 5 bases of merit, punya, kirya, vatu, they're at some level, you have to admit they're determined by intention, because if someone's only generous because they want the foremost seat in the banquet, it's not much of a good quality. So motioning to compassion, and that these other 5 aspects are actually equipment of the mind, ornaments of the mind, he says, for the sake of this expanded heart of loving kindness. And in that, he's implicitly giving an answer to Subha's question at the very beginning by saying, this expanded heart of loving kindness, the intention, the ineffable, is actually the most significant element. And that's further kind of affirmed when he talks, as you noted, Ajahn, about when the mind and heart are expanded with these 4 Brahmaviharas, then any limited action, pamana kamang, does not remain there. Because the power of a mind that's imbued with loving kindness is such that those other actions just fade away. So in this way, he not only draws Subha along in a path of practice and inspires him towards that, rather than just debating intellectually, but he also actually skillfully comes around back to give an implicit answer to Subha's initial question, and basically asserting that the quality of the heart is paramount always. So it's a beautiful discourse, and you see how well it works. Subha's completely inspired, and a beautiful disposition. And I love that our lives are composed of actions done with great love, and the intention is key. You can't judge life from its outward appearance always. And sometimes, endeavors of great scope are no more powerful than endeavors of more humble scope done with great love. So, Ajahn, what is the word of the week?
The word of the week is chaga, and it has a broad meaning. It's a synonym for dana on one end, just chaga, the relinquishment, that which is able to give up material things, all the way it's found in the Third Noble Truth as almost a near synonym to nibbana, as complete relinquishment. So this whole gesture of small, medium, large, and ultimate giving up.
I think the commentaries compare dana, generosity, to a Brahmin at his front of his warehouse giving out alms, whereas chaga is and just throwing open the gates and saying, take what you need. So beautiful. Okay. Well, may we all practice this quality this week, and we'll see some of you on Zoom in just a second. Otherwise, we'll see you next week for Majjhima Nikaya 100. So 2/3 of the way through, Ajahn.
All right.
Ajahn.